someone that you really looked up to who maybe poured into you or made a big impact. Today we're going to be hearing from Libby about that kind of person for her. So, Libby, who was that person in your life?
For me, that was my youth minister. His name was Raleigh Langley, and he was my youth minister from when I started youth group in 7th grade all the way through 12th grade, and then continued to be a consistent presence in my life after that.
And he's still someone that you said you just got a text from him this week.
We still talk regularly.
So what is something, if you were to kind of describe him and his impact on your life, how would you describe it? Or is there like one moment that really kind of sticks out in your memory?
Yes. I think it began with he worked with youth, and he really had a heart for youth ministry, which is why he's done it for 30 plus years.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was a person that was just always present with the youth group. He, I think at least once every time in youth group would say, "I love you guys." And I used to kind of be jaded and skeptical, and I would be like, "You just met this person. You don't love them." And he would say, "Yes, I do, because they are made in the image of God. So I can love them without knowing them."
Wow.
He is an extrovert, and he just loves people. So from when I first started in 7th grade, he just would start talking to you. And he kind of had no social barriers. And it made coming to youth group feel like you were part of the community before you necessarily were or had other people. And I think the way that he led really shaped the whole youth group. So when I was in middle school and high school, youth group was a place that I wanted to be.
So not the case for everybody.
Yeah. So we had it Wednesday night and Sunday night, and I was always there from as soon as I could be there.
Wow. And I think a lot of people, when they think of youth group, they think like pizza parties and basketball games and teenagers trying to be friends and trying not to be awkward with each other. But it sounds like this was probably more fulsome than that.
Yes. It had all of those things.
Yes, it was
and
fun.
I actually, now, as a very far from high schooler, I can look back and I like to say that Raleigh out-awkwarded the awkward because he would just kind of like lean into the awkward in a way that middle school and high schoolers who were uncomfortable, I don't know. Everybody was uncomfortable to a degree that they weren't. So it had all of those things, and it had the gift of a really interesting and caring and concerned teacher.
Right. So having that kind of consistent person demonstrating God's faithfulness to you, even in the midst of your awkwardness, your voice breaking during all of that time. But so you were there as a teenager, then as a volunteer, and then you ended up working as the associate youth minister.
Yes.
And that's kind of where things started to crystallize for you in terms of your call to ministry. Is that
yes.
right?
It's a little...
it's probably
funny.
more complicated than that.
It's more complicated, and some of the timeline I've started to lose. I had been thinking about, could I teach? And I went on a retreat with the youth group as a volunteer, and we had awesome retreats with like 90 youth, and I loved retreats, and I loved helping to lead them and to do all the things. And I somehow on that retreat, I thought, I really think that I need to go to school. Like I need to go and I need to learn the things, because maybe I do want to teach, but I need like a lot of training first. And I was so nervous about telling Raleigh, like so nervous. I didn't eat almost the whole week.
Nervous about telling him that you wanted to go to seminary?
Yes.
Okay.
But there was no ordination or ministry.
You just knew this was the next step.
Yes. And I thought, please just let him say no. Like, let him just say, like, I don't think that's
the right fit for you.
So we went out to lunch, and I mean, I stalled like forever. And finally, he probably knew exactly what was coming. And I told him, and I remember saying, yes, finally. And I was like, finally? This is news to me. What are you talking about?
But he had seen this in you.
Yes, and especially the evolution.
Wow.
I think of who I had been as a high school and like fresh out of college person, and then this was, I don't know, 5 years or so after college.
How did that feel? How did his response feel for you?
It was surprising, and I think encouraging, but I think I also still was kind of holding on to the like, let this be let him say no. He can talk me down, and then I can just go on as I was already going. And I can do my, lay ministry stuff, and I can, lay ministers fill a different and important role in youth ministry. So I really, all of that time held on to what that was and like the importance of it. It still took a little more time before I felt the call to ordained ministry, but that kind of like wiggling of wanting to know more and being able to teach was there, and he knew it. And then he asked me to do associate youth minister, which did require teaching, and I felt so incompetent, but I also knew it was part of the job, and I like to do what's expected. So I did it, and then I realized that I did it, and it was fine, and nobody...
So you finally go to seminary. And then you get the job here as our curate, and turns out we don't have a youth minister, and you're back in that position.
Yeah.
Did that kind of feel... Like, when I hear your whole story, I feel like it's God kind of, like, winking at you. Just like, back at it, girl.
Back at it, yeah. Yeah. I never felt bad about it. Like, I always felt excited. There were aspects of it that were great for a first position because it was stuff that I kind of knew how to do.
Yeah.
There was also, part of it is that youth ministry is a particular subsect, but it's kind of its own church in the fullness of ministry, because it includes teaching, it includes preaching, it includes pastoral care. You kind of run it like its own church in terms of communications and planning and marketing. So I was able to do a lot of different things as youth minister in a way that was really helpful to have that security and knowing that I had been part of a really great youth ministry as a youth, and I had worked for somebody who ran a program really well. Conveniently, I also still knew him and talked to him, so I had a kind of mentor in youth ministry built in already. And I genuinely love youth and youth ministry. So
it's really obvious.
Well, thank you. Some people kind of get over it and move out of it, and I just haven't.
Well, I think it's really cool to see all of those gifts coming out and the lessons that you learned and received as a youth. And one of the things that stuck out to me when I got to guest teach in the youth confirmation class was how you so clearly knew this will not work if it's just me, and that it required the whole community of the church to kind of back it. And one of the ways that you had that shown in that room was you had table leaders. And I know this was maybe kind of part of the existing culture, but it was really exciting to me to see parishioners of all different ages working with these teenagers to try to kind of translate faith through their own lives for them. And we had like a young mom whose kids were not teenagers yet, but she really felt called. And then we had people who were their grandparents' ages, and all of those teenagers were just kind of hanging on their words. So I've seen in the way that you have led youth ministry, the way that you're kind of leading a little church. It's really cool to see that. And you're trying to help everybody buy into caring for these kids at the same time.
And I think that comes out of, I grew up in a church in which I found a lot of community. Our missions my pet peeve was when people called them youth missions, because when I was in middle school and high school, some of the most impactful relationships I had were adults that had gone on mission with us. We always had like the group of young adults who were part of our weekly youth events. So when I mean, Raleigh was a huge impact on my life, and I can name other people from throughout the congregation that at other times stepped in and were present to the things the youth were doing. So my important, or kind of the reason I highlight it the way I do is because it's what was so formative for me.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think that kind of can help us land at our last thing, which is hearing your verse that connects all this stuff for us.
Yes. So this verse, you were asking about kind of what was holding me back in that time. And it was being so kind of convinced that I lacked something that these other very spiritual people in my life had. So for one of the retreats when I was on staff, what we did, one of the things we did on retreat was we had people, the youth would select a verse. So we cut up all these verses and we folded them up, and they picked one. And we would always tell them that this verse, you didn't pick the verse picked you. And it has something to tell you, and you just have to hear it. So I was preparing for all of this, and I was cutting them up, and one of them fell. And I looked down, and it was this verse, which says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. And it kind of like slapped me across the face in that I was feeling so called towards something and knew that I was holding back, and it was this weakness and this lacking, and just seeing so clearly that like it's not me, and in fact like that weakness is not only okay, but it's where Christ is perfected.
Yeah. God will work through your life not despite your weaknesses, but actually like right in that moment, right through those things.
And like we're expected to have them.
Yeah.
So maybe it's okay that we do.
Wow. That sounds like a really powerful moment.
Yeah.
Is it a verse that you still return to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh. Could you read it one more time for us?
It says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
As you go out into this week, that's kind of our prayer for you, that you would feel Christ's power working not despite your weaknesses, but through them, and that you would just come to know more and more deeply how loved you are.